Greetings, my friends. Grab a cup of coffee. Let's talk some training. It's time for Training Cafe. Hey, so today I'm back in my kitchen nook, still in quarantine here in Pennsylvania, but I'm praying for a change here in the next week or two. I'm personally feeling like I'm in climbing shape. I'm ready to climb some rocks, after 6-7 weeks holed up here doing nothing but training and working. That's been kind of my life. Train, work, 7 days a week. Kind of feel like it's that movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, if you saw that. Waking up every day and it's like the same thing all over again. Perhaps you were late. The good news is it seems like in terms of the whole COVID thing, in many parts of the United States and I guess around the world, things have crested and are trailing off, and the social distancing or physical distancing has done its thing. The medical professionals have done terrific. I just read here locally where I live, in the county where I live, there's been 36 fatalities that are related to COVID. And the average age of the deceased is 77. So that at least here locally, but I guess most places, it's the elderly and the sick and people with pre-existing conditions, generally not in good health before they got COVID-19, are the ones who are dying. Though there are some young, fit people dying as well. So, we're not immune, or you're not immune. I'm not young. I'm old and fit, I guess you would say. But in any case, I, as I've been expressing here since the start, am preferring to take a positive mindset. And despite the disappointment in the lost spring climbing season, there have been greater losses by a lot of people. Jobs, interrupted schooling, not being able to travel and visit loved ones, and you hear the tragic stories of an elderly person in the hospital dying, can't even have their family members come see them because of the rules in hospitals, and that tightness or the just concern about people being exposed. So I'm praying the worst is past, and we will begin to reopen the world back up, and also reopen the climbing world back up. Seeing climbing gyms open, seeing crags begin to repopulate with happy climbers, and still doing our thing to maintain social distance. And that's kind of what I'm looking forward to here in the coming weeks. But today's Training Cafe, let me first do my shout out for this episode. And the shout out is to a podcast, a new podcast I actually just discovered in the last week. And it was so impressive. There's a zillion podcasts out there, a few really good ones, a lot of mediocre podcasts. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but there are a few really good climbing and training podcasts that are worth dialing into. And this new one is called The Nugget Climbing. So if you're a podcaster, go to Spotify, go to iTunes, and search The Nugget Climbing. It's Stephen Dimmitt from, I guess he's from the Northwest United States. And he's just getting started with the podcast. He's on number 15, I believe. I listened to one with Jonathan Segrest and with Bill Ramsey, and they were super well done, super entertaining, and super insightful about training and performance matters. And so Steve's podcast adds in there with the Power Company and Training Beta and, those other performance-focused podcasts as being the ones to definitely listen to. And my, personal Training for Climbing podcast, which I do once a month. There's something like 47 of those out there. And I'm really pleased that over the last few years, there's tens of thousands of people around the world downloading the Training for Climbing podcast each month. So I hope you'll check that one out as well. Okay, so let's move on to today's episode. I want to talk a little bit about soft tissue management, and then I'll answer some questions. I wrote down 4 or 5 questions that I saw submitted prior to the start of the broadcast. And if I can see somebody entering in, or if you want to enter in a question, feel free to do so, and I'll see if I can get to it at the end of this podcast. But the topic of soft tissue management, I mean, I guess it's been around forever. You know, the idea of massaging and rubbing your muscles has been around, you know, probably for centuries. Certainly as long as I've been an athlete, which is, you know, 45 years, I've kind of, it's just common sense. You know, if you have a sore, tight muscle, you rub it, or have some friend or family member massage you, or perhaps if you have a professional massage therapist who can work on you, you know, it is a beneficial thing. And, you know, it's something that I guess most people dabble in, you know, kind of rubbing your muscles a little bit as you're warming up for a climb or cooling down from a climb. Certainly professional athletes use massage therapists on a daily basis. Some elite athletes, you know, travel with a massage therapist who helps them with their warm-ups and cool downs and tissue maintenance. And so I always like to point out, you know, if pros do it, it works. There's a lot of things that amateurs and weekend warriors toy around with in all sports, thinking they help performance, thinking they help recovery. You know, performance nutrition is a good example. There's a myriad of supplements out there that claim to do different things, help you lose weight, have more power, raise testosterone, build muscle, recover. But probably like 90% of them are bogus. There are a few that work in the supplement world. It's a subject that I've, of course, researched extensively on, and have spent, you know, 30 years studying and now being involved with professionally. But there are a lot of bogus things out there that claim to enhance performance or aid recovery, that are used by the masses, because, you know, it's kind of wishful thinking, you know, saying, well, if there's no downside to it, why not try it? And sure, if there's no harm, I guess, in trying most things, as long as there's no unintended consequences. You know, I wouldn't, you know, go injecting myself with stuff that's unknown or not proven. I think that would be foolish, although some athletes go there. But in any case, I think you need to always try to consult the science, which is even what I've done with massage therapy. And we'll talk about that here, you know, tissue management and such. And so I'm not an ultra skeptical person. There are some people that say, don't waste your time with any of this stuff. Don't waste your time with nutritional supplements because they're all garbage. And if you take that mindset, then you throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are things that work. And again, if you look to the pros, you often can have a clue at what works, you know, whether that's a pro climber or a pro in other sports. If they're doing it consistently, it likely works. And so that's kind of a starting point. And when it comes to tissue management, the pros definitely are involved with it. So in any case, for climbers, it's the climbing specific muscles that you want to be thinking about most of the time. You know, the arms and the upper torso, you know, just as if you're a runner, you'd be paying more attention to your feet and your calves, and your quads and your hamstrings and your glutes. And not to say that we shouldn't address all of our body parts in terms of trying to maintain muscle and connective tissue health and joint mobility. The focus here today is kind of those upper body muscles. And so let's first talk about the common problem spots. And I think first and foremost, you know, we think about our forearms. Certainly they get fatigued from climbing. They get pumped, and then the next day your muscles feel tight. And so some massage and some stretching can bring a perception of recovery. And that's one thing I noticed when I've dug into the research in recent years, when it comes to studies of massage therapy and trigger point therapy, these different non-invasive modalities, is that in the studies, when they tried to take measurements of things like, or when they did take measurements of blood flow and tissue oxygenation and such, they couldn't really find a statistically significant difference from people using these soft tissue management modalities and those that did not. So on a biological level, it was kind of indistinguishable in many cases, but on a perceptual basis, there was a big difference. So when you would do the tissue management, the massage, and such to an individual, they would perceive less tightness, a reduction in soreness, and just kind of a sense of feeling better. But when it came to the biological markers, it wasn't really identifiable what was going on. So that kind of is one of those strange things, kind of like I guess acupuncture, which is invasive, but it's not kind of understood. People perceive benefit from acupuncture. I'm not doubting that, but there's not a good biological explanation in what's going on in terms of bringing about the improvements. And I know there's a lot of theory, and I'm not totally on top of the science of acupuncture, but I know it's still a little bit nebulous as to what is going on there already. But if it makes you feel better, if you believe that there's improvement, and perhaps there's a degree of placebo effect there, who cares? If you feel better, then it is worth doing. So in any case, in the forearms, and I want to point out there's a difference between the brief, the short-lasting soreness after exercising, and then something that kind of sticks around more than a day or two, like a spasm or a knot that sets in your back or in your forearms or wherever. And then there's actually another step where there's actually an injury, a connective tissue injury, let's say, or a muscle pull. And so if there's more of an acute injury or a developing overuse injury over many weeks, the classic cases with climbers, an acute injury would be something in the fingers, an A2 pulley rupture, let's say, or medial epicondylitis, the bone here on your inside elbow is the medial epicondyle. So if there's pain right at the bone where the tendon meets the bone, that's classic medial epicondylitis. Though there can be other causes of pain in that area that often get misdiagnosed as medial epicondylitis, but that's the first candidate if you have pain right there near the bone. And then, of course, lateral epicondylitis on the outside bony knob of your elbow. Any chronic pain in those areas or acutely developing pain in your fingers, that's connective tissue. And that's not something you want to be rubbing and massaging in its, sensitive or swollen or acute stage. Now, as the healing process plays out over the course of weeks, then yes, some massage can help. Definitely loading tendons is important to help collagen synthesis and alignment of connective tissues. But that goes beyond the scope of this podcast. I want to focus more on what's going on with the muscles. And so short-term post-workout muscle pain, kind of delayed onset muscle soreness that appears the next day. That can be some micro tears in the fascia between contractile fibers, and some calcium leak and some fluid edema that causes a little bit of swelling in the muscles and that sense of delayed onset muscle soreness. And massaging does tend to at least improve pain in terms of our perceptions, but I'm not convinced does anything to speed healing. But again, if it feels better, why not do it? And when it comes to actual spots, trigger points, Those are I think the things that we can really attack as climbers and bring about improvement both short and long term. And let's talk about the two common trigger points in our forearms. One is if you make a fist and then turn your wrist, pronate your hand, you'll see a little bulge. If I can get the camera here, you'll see a little bulge right here that pops out when you pronate your hand, make a fist. This is your pronator teres muscle. And it is an often, when you're climbing, you typically have your hand pronated. And when you're doing pull-ups with your hand pronated, which we do a lot of in climbing and training, this pronator teres gets a lot of work. And so I think most climbers, if you're active in climbing and training, that muscle, if you can get it to jump out, again, by kind of pronating your wrist and making a fist, and if you dig your thumb into that muscle, I think most people will find tenderness. And that tenderness, that's the kind of a spasm or a trigger point in that pronator teres that in many climbers becomes chronic. I've had periods of months where that is a sore muscle. And so by addressing that on a daily basis, both climbing days and rest days, get your thumb on there, kind of get some direct pressure. And then once you find the spot, then you can kind of turn your forearm in and out, supinate, pronate, and kind of, I guess what therapists call a pin and stretch maneuver, go back and forth. And doing this daily, you can help release that spasm and remove that trigger point, which in chronic cases can kind of spread. It's actually one of the things that can mimic medial epicondylitis, giving you kind of that general sense of elbow pain. But when you investigate it further, you discover it's actually the pronator teres that hurts, not the tendon junction with the epicondyle. And so that's a point to work on. Another common one, a couple of them in the forearm, let me just tip the camera down here a little bit, is where the extensor muscles, okay, those are antagonists to our finger flexors. Those extensor muscles, especially if you crimp a lot, and when you crimp tired, your elbow comes out from the wall, which involves recruitment of these extensor muscles in a very sustained fashion if you're chicken winging a lot. And in any case, there's trigger point that or points that develop on the lateral forearm. And it's not up at the epicondyle, but below that, often an inch or two. And, there can be several areas that get sore that I like to kind of rub like this. But also if you find a spot that's especially tender, again, you can kind of apply some direct pressure and then flex your wrist to kind of get that pin and stretch effect. The brachialis that comes across, the brachioradialis, those are other common points. Right now I have some, if I can get it in the picture, I have some, a trigger point kind of right in here that I've been working the last few days. Again, if you're doing a lot of pull-up training, lock-off training, hangboard training, or just climbing a lot, bouldering a lot, I bet you can find these trigger points here, sometimes even here, and possibly even in the bicep, though I don't commonly experience them too much in the bicep. So if you find a trigger point, dwell on it, try to kind of apply a direct pressure, and then doing that daily can provide some fiber spreading benefits, perhaps increased circulation, though again, the research hasn't really supported that idea. But if it feels better, if it reduces pain, then that's a good thing. And these trigger points in extreme situations, my one son Cameron had one in his kind of middle trapezius rhomboid area last summer that developed and really set in and knotted up for a period of months. And so it begins to affect nerves, and you start getting pain that radiates out from it. There's referred pain that can travel to other nearby areas, and it basically shut him down. He went from, sending his 14D project to a few weeks later not being able to climb or boulder, V5 because of the pain in his back. And so he went both the route of seeing a professional massage therapist to help him work through it and identify the problem, and then treating it at home with massage and then some rehab and stretching, all of those together. But you need to remove what is aggravating if it becomes that severe. And that is, in his case, hard climbing and hard training. No one-arm pull-ups for a month, no hard climbing for a month or more, because the soft tissues take time to heal and correct themselves. Just as a connective tissue, a ligament or tendon takes time. Many of these injuries, though we would like to think we can climb through them, it's smarter and more effective just to take a little bit of time off and address the injury and get the healing process started. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the soft tissue management, the trigger points, is all of these little conditions, like the trigger point that forms in your lateral forearm. If it becomes chronic, long-term, I'm talking months, that muscle tightness, that spasm is pulling on the tendon that attaches to the lateral epicondyle. And so that could contribute to developing lateral epicondylitis. And so by addressing these soft tissue spots, these pains, not only do you feel better and perhaps enhance recovery and perhaps enhance performance in the short term, but hopefully help reduce your chance of injury in the long term. Now, I'm getting long-winded here. I wanted to mention a few tools to use. Something I've done for a long time. Generally I use my fingers a lot to find the trigger points and to work them out. But you can also take a blunt object, like this is a big Sharpie or some other similar blunt object, and you can really, find a spot and dig into it. Or like in the case of that pronator teres, you can, kind of use a blunt object to work in there. And again, you don't want to be applying this to tendons or bony areas, but to the muscle belly itself. You want to make sure you're on the muscle. Here's a wonderful tool that's been around for a number of years. It's called an arm aid. And you can still get these things, although there's a cheaper consumer version that looks a little different than this, but it's another way to kind of attack the muscles. And this is a beauty for kind of getting those lateral trigger points on the lateral forearm. And you kind of have this clamshell you squeeze with one hand to apply the pressure, and the ball you can roll along the length of the muscle, or if I find it right there's a trigger point, I can stop and dwell on it, come back up and attack that spot that I have there. And same thing with the pronator muscle. I can get this right on that pronator muscle, pin it, and then kind of do that supination, pronation motion and release it. We travel with these things, and I know some pro climbers who travel with an arm aid because it is such an effective tool. It's not quite as fatiguing as digging your thumb or fingers into a spot. The mechanical advantage you get from kind of squeezing this together and having the ball apply the pressure you don't get a workout as you're stretching yourself. And of course, the latest rage is these things. This is a Theragun, which you can apply again to muscles big and small. Works wonders on your back. And I've had some climbers say they like to just hold the ball in their hand loosely. And although you're not probably speeding recovery or doing anything, it sure does feel good. It speaks to that whole perceptual idea of it. Wow, your hand kind of is fizzing, and I'm sure there is a short-term enhancement of circulation, and so that can't be a bad thing either. Again, I would be careful not using that on a fresh injury, that's for sure. But the Theragun, an expensive tool. I think this model was around $400. But you go to a massage therapist, it's 75 bucks an hour. So one of these hopefully lasts you a few years, and the massage therapist for $400, you get a few visits. So I think it's a good investment, something probably we'll see more climbers traveling with. And I did some research before I got this. There are a lot of knockoffs, like you go to Amazon and there's cheap versions that are knockoffs for 100, 150 bucks. And I think you get what you pay for in this type of technology. Going with a mid or higher end version, the real thing, you might say, I think is good. You get different attachments. You have a higher frequency. In fact, this has 3 different speeds for of use. And, the cheap model, you might find it breaks after 6 months. Who knows? And so that is something that we've just recently received, and I'm looking forward to using long-term and maybe report back in 6 months whether I think it was worth $400 or not. And so in any case, when it comes to soft tissue management, I spend all of my time really from the elbows to the wrist, all through here. That's where the ball. I do daily stretching of my entire body. I'm a pretty tight climber in terms of my lower body, so I need to maintain what range of motion I have with daily stretching. And I do a lot of foam rolling. That's obviously a very simple way to do tissue management. I travel with a foam roller because I find them useful. But these other tools, you can be a lot more targeted with an arm aid or a Theragun than you can with a foam roller, which is nice for rolling your back, but it's kind of tough to use, say, on your forearms. Okay, so let me leave it at that. I've been on here for almost a half an hour. Let me just fire off here a few questions very fast. And Brandon, before the show, wanted to know, is it good to crack your knuckles? And really, I've never been a knuckle cracker. I don't feel the need to do that, but I know someone who does. My one son is a chronic cracker. He just seems to need the crack and gets a perception of a release and, things being a little more mobile, perhaps, when he cracks his neck or his fingers or his back. But in any case, again, if you go to the research, there is no downside to cracking. So the old wives' tale that it's going to lead to arthritis or be have negative or unintended consequences, there's no evidence for that. So the bottom line is, Brandon, is if it feels good, do it. Another question, wooden holds. Since they're harder to grip than plastic holds, does that make them better for training because you need to grip harder? And certainly friction is inversely proportional to finger force. The more slippery a hold is, the harder you have to grab it. So if you have a brand new plastic hold with fresh texture that feels like 80 grip sandpaper, you don't have to apply as much finger force as you do on the same hold if it was made from wood. So yeah, you do need to grip harder. But when it comes to training value, well, I think it's more preference. Do you prefer the feel of wood or the feel of plastic? And you would just adjust the hold size to accommodate the finger force. So, if you could, on a wood hold, use a slightly bigger hold to grab with the same force as a plastic hold, you would need to go to a smaller hold if it has more friction to have the same finger force. And so it does come down to preference. If you are a sweatier type of climber, then the extra friction is good. I think having the plastic holds with the texture, if you're not such a sweaty person, then the wooden holds might feel better. Skin wear is a factor, obviously. If you're prone to wearing your skin out or doing long sessions, like the pro climbers who might put in 4 or 5 hour sessions, then wood holds, I think, are better for just preserving skin. And so I don't know that there's a better hold, so to speak, wood or plastic. I think it does come down to preference and just kind of who you are. But again, if you're training long, then I think having some wood mixed in is beneficial. Here at our house, we have both wood and plastic holds and hangboards. And so on days that our skin is kind of raw, we tend to gravitate more towards the wood. And on days that are hot and sweaty, but we have good skin, maybe we're more on the more aggressive plastic holds. And a final comment, if you do finger force testing or hangboard training with weights where you are tracking your weights or tracking your finger force, say session to session or month to month, if you're gauging those things, you have to use the exact same hold, the exact same testing hold every time. Because again, the frictional differences from one board 20 millimeter edge and another board, they're not going to be the same. If one has texture, one doesn't. If one is greasy wood versus new wood, I mean, even the ambient temperature and humidity affects the grip and the finger force required. So if you're going to take accurate measurements of finger force testing, all of those things have to be controlled. And certainly if you're hangboard training with weight, like maximum weight hangs where you're tracking your weight and maybe adding a few pounds a week or something like that, I would use the exact same holds and the exact same board every time, just so that you have at least controlled for the hold size and frictional properties. Okay, on to Greg. How to train footwork while on quarantine at home with no climbing wall, no bouldering wall to use. And I don't think there's a way to do that, really. You need to be able to use your feet. Climbing footwork is a skilled thing, and there's not a lot of transfer of skill from, say, footwork dancing to footwork climbing. There's a lot of other things that transfer from dancing to climbing, like the flexibility and kind of the kinesthetic awareness of center of gravity. But when it comes to climbing footwork specifically, other than staying mobile, staying limber, doing daily stretching, I'm not sure there's much you can do. The good news is climbing skills, once they become hardwired, they last. Kind of like riding a bike. If you learn to do it as a kid, you can do it if you haven't ridden a bike for 10 or 20 years. You jump on a bike, you can do it. And while climbing footwork is a lot more precise than riding a bike, there is motor, that motor skill, once it's wired in, sticks around. And so taking a few months off while you're in quarantine from climbing, I would expect you to get back on the rock and your footwork is going to be pretty good from the day one and will come back completely in a matter of days. It's physical conditioning that is more lost when you're at home in quarantine, especially that aerobic energy system that we've talked about in previous podcasts that is hard to preserve with just a hangboard. And so those are things that can take weeks or even months to come back once you return to outdoor climbing. Another question from Piero. He's asking about on hangboard training, maximum strength and strength endurance and power endurance. He does his maximum hangs with 28 kilograms added to his body. So around 60, 65 pounds. So that's a lot of weight for maximum hangs. When he goes to doing repeaters, he's only adding 8 kilograms of added weight, but says he fails before he gets to the end of the set of repeaters. And so immediately I'm going to say, Piero, you're using too much weight for your repeaters. In fact, if you're adding 28 kilograms for max hangs, if you're using the same hold for the repeaters, you're probably going to want to be more at just body weight for the repeaters. And I like doing repeaters at just body weight and adjusting the hold size as you do set over set of repeaters, adjusting the hold size so that you can continue and not fail on any set of repeaters. And also, if you're going to do 10 sets of repeaters, not fail on set 8 or 9. You want to get through all 10 sets. Again, the point of repeaters is to train endurance, which is both anaerobic and aerobic, which means you need to have blood flowing. You shouldn't be failing in the middle of a set. And so I think if you're training at 28 kilograms for max hangs, probably doing repeaters at body weight is the way to go. And for somebody who is doing max hangs with just body weight, or maybe with just a few pounds added to their body, well, for repeaters, they're either going to need to use really large holds or remove body weight with a counterweight system, or by standing in slings or elastic bands or something like that. You should be doing your repeater training at half of the load, total load, body weight and added weight, about half of the load of your max hangs. Or, again, the hold size dictates how much load you're going to be using, but it should be at half or less than your maximum voluntary contraction, so that blood flow is not being occluded so severely. Okay, so about out of time here. I'm just seeing if there's any last minute questions that have come in here. Let's see here. Stan, is there a better, worse time to spend time with an arm aid, pre or post workout? Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly doing a little bit of stretching and a little bit of massage, and maybe a little bit of trigger point work before your workout or before you're climbing would be a good thing as part of the warm-up process. But there is research, and I totally believe this, that if you do excessive stretching or tissue work prior to performance, you actually can diminish performance a little bit. And I've talked about this before. There's a couple of things going on here. To perform optimally, especially powerful movements, things that require rate of force development and big, powerful movements like jumping, if you do a lot of stretching, you affect the nervous system adversely, and you also affect the connective tissues, which you actually want to be stiffer. Stiffer tendons and collagen scaffolds that run through your muscles and transmit the force from your muscles to your tendons to the bone. Stiffness is a good thing for performance because it increases rate of force development, your ability to be powerful and exhibit power is higher the stiffer your system is. And so that's a training adaptation you get over the long term, many years of training using things like plyometric training and campus training. If you do a lot of stretching, a lot of static stretching, pre-workout, pre-performance, if you do a lot of massage, pre-workout, pre-performance, you can actually diminish performance a little bit and reduce your ability to express strength in powerful ways. Your maximum strength might not be reduced, but your ability to express it quickly may be reduced. And so that's not something you want to do before you're going out to do hard bouldering or to go into competition or to go red point your project. And so doing a little bit of that as part of the warm-up process, yes. You should be doing more dynamic warm-up, however. That is what has been proven to be effective before you climb and train. And then after the workout, post-workout or even at night before bed, doing static stretching, doing the tissue management, the foam rolling, the Theragun, the arm aid, to address the tight muscles and the trigger points at the end of the day, I think is the way to do it. And of course, on rest days. Final question here. Somebody asked, talk a little bit about the science behind Endurex. What is Endurex? Well, that is one of the supplements of my company, PhysiVantage. Endurex is a pre-workout supplement that is research-based, and it has beetroot extract and citrulline malate and betaine. And those substances have all been proven pretty conclusively to enhance aerobic function of exercising muscles. They act as vasodilators that improve blood flow and in the case of citrulline malate, even improve the oxygen kinetics of the slow twitch muscle fibers, perhaps enhancing mitochondria respiration and the ability to create ATP during sustained exercise. There's actually multiple pathways by which Endurex works to increase aerobic function in exercising muscles. And so taking it pre-workout an hour ahead of time helps the vasodilat. Let's just talk about your forearm muscles. Helps open up the capillaries a little bit, helps improve endothelium function, and perhaps enhances mitochondria function, all in ways that improve oxygen kinetics. And the research shows perhaps a 5%, I mean, each study is a little bit different, but as an average, maybe a 5% improvement, which, you know, if you're a beginner climber or a weekend warrior, perhaps it's not a noticeable difference. But for an avid climber, a pro climber, someone who's projecting or training at their limit or climbing at their limit, 5% is massive in terms of, performance and recovery between performance, because the Endurex does both. And the pro climbers who have used it have remarked that they feel less pumped, both during warm-up, that flash pump stage, and performance stage. They get a sense that things are flowing more smoothly, less of a traffic jam, you might say, in their forearm flexor muscles, and that they recover quicker between bouts of exercise or between climbs or between boulders. And so the research is there, the anecdotal evidence is there. It's been athlete proven, not only with climbers, but outside of the sport of climbing. And it's a supplement that I'm proud to put my name on. And so if you want to try that out, visit physivantage.com. And perhaps sometime I'll do a full episode talking about the various PhysiVantage supplements in our growing line. Again, they're all science-based. I believe, without a doubt, they all work. I would not sell or manufacture a product and put my name on a product that didn't work. And so if you're someone who's doing everything else right, your training, your diet, your nutrition, your rest and recovery, well, then supplements, at least ones that work, are probably a good investment of time and money. If you're doing a lot of things wrong, if you're not eating right, if you're not training right, if you're overtraining or undertraining, you need to fix those issues first before you visit performance nutrition. That's my personal take on that subject. Okay, so I've run over schedule here. I guess it's time to sign off. With coffee, I will sign off, and we'll see you on Thursday.